Hello guys, today I'm talking about Half-Life 2. I just have to say right off the bat, it's amazing, incredible, insane how this game came out in 2004, and all of the mechanics from like ragdolls to the physics to all the little puzzles and everything and the guns in this game, it really would not be topped from a purely mechanical standpoint until, well, I mean, really, not even today. I mean, really, I guess, the new Doom game, I guess, maybe. But what the groundwork they laid out, the fact that they created this in 2004 is beyond shocking. It's almost black magic how they pulled this off. And I understand now why PC guys were so ravenous and rabid about this game back in the day, because one, it could really only run on PC, despite it was, ported to the orange box, but it was taking the full capability of the technology at the time to render these kinds of situations and scenarios and graphics and all this other stuff. Yeah, and of course this game does not resemble the Half-Life 1 at all. Like, the jump in technology in terms of physics, graphics really mostly, and mechanics is frankly insane. It is honestly bonkers. And so a lot of people for a long time said that Half-Life 2 was their favorite game. Like, this is the opus magnum, the best game that'll ever be made. And for me, I always kind of had not a hard time listening to that, but it was always like, well, what's the story? And the story, honestly, is not anything super interesting, and that's one of the main reasons why I didn't play this for a very long time, because there's nothing about it that really drew me towards it, except it was a very impressive piece of technology. And it's like, well, there's always going to be another impressive piece of technology after this. But of course, this was like the standard. This was actually very impressive for a number of years. And so, again, in the first Half-Life, they don't really do a great job of explaining the story and what's going on. Like, who is the G-Man? Why is he following you? Why does he care about Zen? What does he mean you've been contracted? And what's really interesting about this game is it picks up right off where Half-Life 1 left off, where basically you are stranded in Zen, and G-Man gives you the choice to work for him, and you step into this cart or trolley thing or whatever, and you basically start this game immediately there at that point. So I do think it is important to play Half-Life 1 because you can appreciate that opening intro. But now the graphics are completely redone. You're in a completely different world. And so the basic story is that aliens have invaded Earth, when you open that portal to Zen. And so you kind of feel responsible for this whole thing. And what they've done in a very short amount of time is they've created this thing called the Combine, which is literally a combination of humans and alien technology, I believe, turning them into these cyborgs. And you have Dr. Breen, which has basically taken over City 17 and been, the designated human administrator for this controlled zone. And so you basically join the resistance and more or less have to, help the people essentially fight back against these aliens, and you become kind of a superhero where everyone knows you. It also introduces you to Alex and Eli, these two new characters who are going to help you on your journey, as well as Dog, this giant sort of AI mech thing that follows you around and helps you out. And another huge thing that became very iconic of Valve and Half-Life in general is the gravity gun in this game. It is the gun that you can basically shoot things around the environment via physics, or you can pick things up. And so, a really big thing that people raved about Half-Life 2 in general is just generally how good the physics are in this game, and how this would lay the groundwork for the standard for physics for probably, honestly, the next 20 years. It's still probably being used today. There's nothing I've seen in terms of physics that has really surpassed Half-Life to be. And so again, this game is literally black magic. I don't know how they made it. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. And so this can give you some context as to why people were so hyped, so endlessly longing, edging themselves to the release of Half-Life 3 as if it would be a similar jump in technology. And I think I mean, I honestly have come to agree with Gaben over the years as in terms of his philosophy as the kind of initial idea and then support the idea you only make 2 of every single game. And that's the philosophy that they've stuck to all these years, and they refuse. They even did Half-Life 2 DLCs, and they did 2 DLCs, but they will not release a third one. It's absolutely insane to me just how stubborn yet tactical Valve has been over the years. And again, I just find it super, super interesting that, like, honestly, Gaben is right after all this time, because you make an initial idea of a game, you kind of make it rough and hard, and then you kind of smooth out and polish out everything with the sequel, and that becomes the definitive version of the game, which you just support over the years. And that's what they did with TF2 and their other IPs. I forget the League one. It's Dota or whatever, or Dota 2 rather. And yeah, it's kind of, I've noticed that, like, usually, and not always the case, but sometimes the sequels are literally, the first couple sequels are the best version of that game. So things like, I don't know, Devil May Cry 3, you could argue Majora's Mask maybe, Sonic Adventure 2, Nier Automata, you just kind of peak with the sequel versions of the titles, and then that becomes the definitive version of that game. And to kind of go beyond that to a third and a fourth game, a lot of game franchises and companies end up just reinventing it and doing something completely new or different. Like Devil May Cry 5 is more or less the same, but there's so much stuff in there that is almost different from 3. And with 4, they also did a lot more stuff with Nero's playset. But yeah, I do see the utility in this, and that's why we would never get Half-Life 3, because Valve knew that their reputation of making a really good game is better than making a really bad game. Like, I guess what happened with Doom 3, for example. And so they said, we cannot make the same jump in technology and physics as we did with Half-Life 2, and they just didn't bother to do it. And honestly, it's kind of a smart idea on their end. But what I realized from that story, or from that experience, is that the people who were waiting for Half-Life 2, basically there was a time limit for when you have to release a sequel before the hype dies down and people were like, we don't even want a sequel at this point. And that seemed to be about roughly 10 years. So in about 2014, people just stopped caring about Half-Life 3 because they realized, oh, it's just been too long. It's not going to happen. Don't bother, worrying or waiting about it. And so they kind of got to this thing where they kind of got over it and went on to other stuff. But people still were waiting for Half-Life 3 for a long time. But I think now at this point, it's pretty much over. Because Valve said, we're just not going to do it. And, they dropped hints here and there saying, we might, maybe. And sure enough, they did release, I guess, a third Half-Life game, which was Half-Life Alyx, which is VR only. And so again, I mean, Valve is a very interesting company. They've always been about the technology. They're not really interested in telling super engaging stories. I mean, with Portal being maybe the major exception. They do, good characterization, obviously, with TF2. But I've never felt any of their work has really come together in one kind of cohesive package. And even though I do think Half-Life 2 is probably their best, piece in production, I still feel that its story is a little bit lacking. Like, a lot of things are left unexplained. Even with the DLC, things are left unresolved. Like, this entire time, it's been a cliffhanger. And so part of the reason that they were able to sell Half-Life Alyx is like, oh, we resolved the cliffhanger after like 2 decades almost. But yeah, it's kind of a weird thing to see a game that just kind of peaked and they decided to just leave it alone and work on other stuff. And Valve, ended up, creating Steam and all these other, platforms and services, and just finding new and effective ways to really just dig in and revolutionize the gaming market. I mean, Valve has done more for gaming than a lot of companies combined, frankly, and shaped the gaming landscape into something that, couldn't even be conceived. I mean, Steam itself, despite what people say about it or its interface and whatnot, the fact that you have access to practically unlimited games for like Steam sales where they sell for literally like dollars is just an amazing feat. But anyway, I'm getting off track, but back to Half-Life. 2. What's also very impressive about Half-Life 2, it introduces vehicles. And God help us, I mean, Call of Duty in like 2010 was still struggling how to put vehicles into their game, and it just was not working, and Valve figured it out. Valve figured out everything with this game, and it peaked, and people just wanted more, and they said, no, we refuse to continue this game franchise. Even though it would make them so much money, they kind of wanted to cement their legacy as, you know, these gurus, I guess, or whatever their reason was. And yeah, there's certain segments of this game, again, where I just don't find the environment super interesting. There's this one thing where you're on a highway and you have to shoot down gunships, and again, you know, the sound effects, the guns, the ragdolls, like everything in this game is very impressive. From a technical standpoint, it feels like a modern game. You definitely don't feel like this is when they made this, they knew they had made the game of the future. They knew this was the next big step in technology and progress and whatnot. But yeah, you eventually end up uncovering, you know, you end up coming to the central tower of Citadel of City 17 and going inside, you know, and finding out the conspiracy and confronting the doctor. And again, the gravity gun is a super useful, cool weapon, and the DLC is kind of focusing more on using the gravity gun as a main offensive weapon. There's this whole thing where in episode 1, you kind of use it as a particle gun, or at the end of definitely the first game, the gravity gun becomes a totally offensive weapon, and so you can use that essentially to just vaporize enemies, no problem. And then in episode 2, it acts more like a functional piece of equipment where you have these walkers, and with the walkers, essentially what you have to do is take these bombs and chuck it at them, and along with Dog, you know, he'll throw you stuff and you can chuck it at the enemy as well. One cool thing is that they had like a horror segment in this game where you have to go to Ravenholm, and it's this one segment in the game where it's supposed to be kind of like horror induced, where it's been overrun by head crabs and it's kind of like horror themed, and you basically need to use things like buzz saws with the gravity gun and saw them in half and all this other kind of crazy gruesome stuff. But yeah, again, I guess I appreciate Half-Life 2 because it tells more of a story, it has better gameplay. But again, I've never really connected with the Half-Life universe. It's kind of very depressing and dystopian. And again, they don't fully really explain what's going on. But from a technical perspective, it's an absolute marvel. It's a very fun game. The guns are absolutely great. Gordon Freeman, despite everything, is a pretty good character, and the other characters in the story as well. Something cool is that the Vortigaunts in this one actually are kind of your allies, which is new. And the G-Man still has his cryptic messages, but you never actually end up confronting him and finishing the fight or what was started or whatever. It just kind of, again, ends on a cliffhanger in the second DLC episode. And again, that whole kind of structure to a double DLC thing is something that would become totally standard going on from Call of Duty to every other franchise that did it. They found that doing 2 DLC packets, you know, the things that they weren't able to fit into the game initially, were a great way to approach it. And again, it was a great incentive for publishers, or developers rather, because that money was, you know, it didn't depreciate. It was always an online store, and it always went directly into their pockets. And so it was seen as a way for developers to make, you know, more money on the side after their game released and was kind of quote unquote finished. And so yeah, again, Valve set the precedent for that as well with the for the DLC for Half-Life 2, which is, again, is pretty kind of crazy to think about, because now it's like DLC is like secondhand nature to us, but at a time it was really new. And of course there's different DLCs and origin stories, but this is the first big one that really kind of made it in. Again, I'm always really impressed by the fact that there are actually puzzles in this game. It's just not all just combat. There's a kind of a decent story being told, and again, it's not anything super enthralling or anything, but I think it does what it intends to do really well. And so I don't know if you play this in modern day if you'd be surprised or interested or really impressed by what they did in 2004, but with the context this is a 2004 game, you can really begin to be like, oh wow. But yeah, again, you know, a new technology always comes around, and it's really a question of what story is being told. And the story in Half-Life 2 is not bad, but it's not anything like 10 out of 10 masterpiece worthy. It's still fairly good. But again, that's why I was always so confused about this game for the longest time, because I could not understand why people thought it was a masterpiece. And really what it is that with time, it's kind of aged, and the story and everything, and all the things that were super stupidly, ridiculously impressive at the time have kind of faded, and the story is just kind of okay. It's still, you know, not bad. I mean, it's one of those frustrating things where they don't bother explaining a lot of things. But you can basically infer, okay, there's an alien invasion, gotta, you know, stop the bad guy, save the girl, all the rest of it. Pretty straightforward stuff. And yeah, it's just fascinating to me how dissimilar this feels from a Half-Life 1. They're completely different games. They don't even feel even remotely similar. Really, honestly, they feel like completely different games. Anyway, I'm not sure what else to say about the greatest PC game of all time. I think it's still definitely worth a play today. If anything, a very interesting piece of history, and to see why people have been clamoring for a sequel to this game for years. And there is a story component, again, like I said, cliffhanger, which ends on the second piece of the DLC. And yeah, it's a pretty significant cliffhanger with no satisfying conclusion. And because Valve knew they couldn't develop, you know, like a product that was as grand as, you know, a Half-Life 3, they just didn't. And so that cliffhanger has lived rent-free in people's minds for a long time, until Half-Life Alyx, which apparently not a lot of people played anyway. So, but yeah, that's a little bit of history of Valve and Half-Life 2. Great game, great gameplay. Hasn't aged a day, and is just absolutely wonderful. Anyway, guys, I'll see you guys later. Bye.